Select Board, Planning Board, and Growth Planning Committee is called to order at 6 p.m., 6:02. And I guess,
Planning board has to call
Okay.
to order.
Planning Board called order?
Planning Board, we have 5 members, well more than a quorum, so we're in good shape.
Paul, you want to? Oh, Dan. Sorry.
Dan Saunders will call the Growth Planning Committee meeting to order, and we have 4 members present.
So we're all here to talk about LD 2003, and I'm going to turn it over to Galen Weebly, who is going to be leading us in this workshop.
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for attending. We do have a special guest with us tonight. Hillary Gove is here from Maine DECD. She is one of the housing coordinators for the state to help with implementation of LD 2003. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a quick presentation. I'm going to hand it over to Hillary to provide a quick overview of LD 2003. I'll then cover some of the components of what we've been doing or where this is impacting in our community, and then we'll also discuss where we're at in the process. And then at that point, you guys can open up to questions that either Hillary or myself can answer. I would like to make mention that we do have a hard stop at 7:30 for Hillary, and we need to be respectful of her time. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Hillary.
Could I say one more?
Oh,
Could I
yes,
say-
please use the microphones for transcription purposes.
Galen, I'd like to say one thing to the people out in TV land. I know we have thousands. So I would just like to mention that we will not take any questions during the workshop, but we'd be happy to after the meeting, after the workshop is over. If somebody wants to ask a question, we would take questions.
Thanks, Galen. Hi, everyone. My name is Hillary Gove, and I am one of the 2 Housing Opportunity Program Coordinators at the Maine Department of Economic and Community Development. My program was started as part of LD 2003 to help communities comply with this new law, as well as to provide financial assistance to communities who are updating ordinances to comply with the new law. So I will tonight provide a very broad overview of what is LD 2003, and Galen will go into some more specifics about specific proposals or changes to your amendments, but I sort of want to provide a level setting of what the 3 buckets, as we call them, or statutes, require municipalities to do. So I will start with sort of the easiest bucket first, which I think you have the best handle on, and that is the accessory dwelling unit bucket. And that law requires municipalities to allow at least 1 accessory dwelling unit on a lot with an existing single-family home. And these accessory dwelling units can be within the existing single-family home, attached to it, or detached from it. And I can wait a minute to get the...
That's cool.
Ooh.
I like that, though.
Was anyone at Woodstock?
Hate to admit it, yes.
Can't remember.
Yep, you can go to the next slide. Thank you.
So this is a document that my office created to really provide a very broad overview. Certainly doesn't cover all the aspects of the statutes, but it gives a nice gist. So I'm starting on the far right, actually, talking about the accessory dwelling units. So as I mentioned, the minimum requirements of the law are 1 accessory dwelling unit on a lot with an existing single-family home. The law states that the minimum size of these accessory dwelling units is 190 square feet. However, it does not establish a maximum size. So a municipality may, if it so chooses, establish a maximum size. There's no really correct answer for this, but it's over 190 square feet. The other key aspect of this is that accessory dwelling units are exempt from any density requirements or lot area per dwelling unit requirements that a town may have. Another key aspect is that a municipality cannot require additional parking spaces for the addition of the accessory dwelling unit. And I understand that you already have a current you call it an accessory apartment, but an ADU is another term for accessory apartment, and you already have that in ordinance already. So I will not spend a ton of time on that, but happy to take questions later. So moving into the middle bucket, as we call it, which is the up to 4 dwelling units section. So this section of law, generally speaking, allows between 2 and 4 dwelling units on residential lots in areas that are zoned for residential uses. So generally speaking, the statute allows on lots without an existing residential unit, the addition of up to 2 dwelling units. Lot area requirements still could come into play if you have those established in your municipality. Other setback requirements or road requirements would also still come into play to potentially limit that development. The exception to that general rule is that if you have an empty lot or a lot that doesn't have an existing dwelling unit in a designated growth area, an individual could potentially put up to 4 units on that lot. Again, lot area requirements could come into play, other dimensional requirements could come into play, but that's generally speaking, if you're in a growth area, it's up to 4 units. The other aspect of this law is that if a lot has an existing dwelling unit on it, such as an existing single-family home, an individual can put up to 2 additional dwelling units on that lot. Again, dimensional requirements would still come into play. And those units could be attached to the existing unit already, detached, or it could be within the existing unit. And then I also should just mention briefly for all these buckets, I don't want to glaze over it too much, is that shoreline zoning requirements still would come into play. So your shoreline zoning ordinance could alter sort of the dimensional requirements if you're talking about lots in the shoreline zone. Are we waiting for questions or?
So if you want to take questions, that way it's fresh in mind, you can.
Sure, if that's acceptable. I'm happy
Just
to take
in the middle
questions.
bucket.
Yeah.
New lot versus an old lot. New lot, nothing there, you get 2 units. But if there is a dwelling unit, you get 3.
Yes, it's I think an interesting sort of result of the compromise in the legislative process. Or if it's in a growth area, you could potentially have up to
Right.
4, but
Yeah, I
yes,
understand that.
yeah.
So the difference between an accessory and a dwelling unit, if there's no cap on the size of an accessory unit, isn't that synonymous to a dwelling unit?
Excellent question. We get that a lot. So I think that if a municipality doesn't establish a maximum size, then it is a challenge for a code enforcement officer to determine what's the difference between a dwelling unit and an accessory dwelling unit. So we've been telling municipalities to define dwelling unit and accessory dwelling unit, and likely the difference between the two would be establishing a maximum size for the ADU.
We have a max in ours already
For the current, yeah.
for the current, which we would keep. Can we just go over,
May I ask,
there-
how do we, I thought I was acknowledged, but
Yeah, Ed,
apparently I wasn't.
Ed, what's your question?
So we were on the middle bucket here,
Yes.
and before we leave that, I'm hung up on the middle bucket as it applies to Kennebunkport. It seems to me that right now, we allow multiple dwellings for lots as long as it adheres to the minimum size per type of dwelling per zone. If we don't change that, it seems to me that this law doesn't have any impact on us. I can put on a 10-acre lot right now, I could put, let's say 8 or 10 single-family homes. I can't put any more on it. I don't see how this is really of consequence to us.
I will definitely defer to Galen, who is the expert on your land use and zoning code. But I will say that some municipalities, this doesn't impact a lot because they already allow for the type of use typologies that LD 2003 envisions. Other municipalities, they only allow single-family homes in their communities.
Sure, or just one residence per lot.
So I think
But-
that,
But we don't have that restriction.
so I certainly would defer to Galen as far as specifics, but I would say it might
What am
not
I
be
missing?
felt that much throughout your community.
The reason, so the genesis for LD 2003, that might be helpful to give an overview of it, but it was really to promote more housing opportunities in the state of Maine, especially as it relates to workforce housing. You know, we saw with the pandemic, the inward migration of individuals that moved to Maine, especially for job opportunities. And one of the barriers to that is housing. And so what the legislature identified is that, you know, local zoning, there are some towns where they have this restriction of just single parcel, you know, you can only have one single family and that's it. Kennebunkport doesn't have that. But that, you know, when the legislature creates
No,
this, it's a broad brush.
I understand that, and I think it's important, but as we allocate our time and concern to doing right by this new law, I don't want to go spend a lot of time on something that it seems to me we're already in compliance with. More than just in the spirit of, I think we literally are in compliance with it.
I also should just note that these are certainly the minimum requirements of the law, and municipalities may be more permissive if they choose to do so.
And this is provocative toward that discussion, so I understand that as well.
So is there a difference between, Ed, is there a difference between, say, the growth area and the 4 units?
Every zone right now has differences in the minimum size per dwelling unit. So, for example, a single-family home in the village residential, you need 40,000 square feet,
Yes.
right? So on a 2-acre lot, you could put two, no, I don't know anyone that's done this, but you could put 2 homes today. You can't put any more because of this law. In Cape Porpoise, you only need, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's 20,000 for a single-family home.
It's in you have the
So
dimensional standard.
it varies.
Right.
1 acre zoning is pretty common, it seems, but we haven't had any discussions about changing that.
So we would be, so the difference between the 4 units into a growth area,
mix.
we're already in compliance with that.
We're already in a situation where, independent of how many, whether it's in the growth area or not, if you're in a zone, it
And you
says,
can
this is
meet-
how many square feet you need if you're gonna put in a single-family home. This is how many square foot you need per dwelling if you're gonna put in a 2-family home.
Okay.
And if multiplexes are allowed, and there's 5 zones where multiplexes are allowed, this is how many square feet you need per
for a
dwelling
mul-
unit for a multiplex.
Okay.
Typically
Is it-
20,000 square.
Is it
only
a
question-
matter of timing? Is it a matter of timing? Does this law, is there something different between what the state's requesting versus what we have in the books in terms of timing of when you could build on these? Is that?
No.
I don't see
So
it.
the only thing that we would probably need more guidance on from the state is in your areas that are zoned without multiplex, if the 3 units is allowed, are they allowed to be attached? Because right now in your zoning, you have certain zones that don't allow multiplexes, which is generally 3 or more dwelling units that are in a single structure. And so if the law is saying that they can have 3, can they be attached all into one structure? And so that's something that's a nuance that we would have to get some guidance on, and maybe you know the answer.
I can answer that question, but I also have another comment on your dimensional requirements, but I certainly,
Yeah.
if we can save that if you want to wait till your presentation, if that's helpful. So the answer to that is, if we're talking about in a growth area, the up to 4 unit section, the law itself doesn't specify how the up to 4 units need to be configured. So we have been saying that municipalities can choose. So you could say 4 units in one building. You could say 2 duplexes or 2-family, as you call it. You could say a single-family home and a triplex. That's a decision for your community to make if you have strong feelings about it all being in one building or a variety of different
But
combinations.
if you have already done that, in other words, you've said that in a particular zone, you can have 2-family homes, you can have single-family homes, but in some zones, you can't have a multiplex. You can't have 3-family homes. This law doesn't compel you to change that, as
Well,
I read it.
you would have to, in growth areas, allow up to 4 units. So if you're defining multiplex as 3 or more, then those growth areas you would need to allow on lots without existing residential units, up to 4 units.
If it's in one building,
That's a decision for you to make.
They have to meet the residential density of that zone.
That's right,
right.
which is going to
Say that again,
prohibit a
Galen.
multiple.
They would have to meet the density requirements of that zone.
So that still overrides this law. So when we say we have to have a
part of
1
this law.
acre, we can't, someone can't put two units on that 1 acre because our ordinance
Right,
says.
they're not meeting our density.
So our setbacks, so the state hasn't changed our setbacks,
Nope.
our ordinances, or our zoning for our different areas. Right, so that's all,
And they've said also, if you do have a density requirement, you can't play a game where the first dwelling has X, and then, but you need much bigger than that to put a second dwelling on there. You can't play that game. You have to play fair. Whatever is the density requirement for the first unit on the lot needs to be maintained.
This is actually a comment that I have when I was looking over the dimensional requirements. For many of the zones, I think you adhere to that. Although there were a couple zones I noticed, and I hope I have the most updated version. If not, please correct me. But I think in the Village Residential East Zone and the Riverfront Zone, you, let's see. You are allowing, for instance, let's see, in the Village Residential East Zone, you have 40,000 square feet for 1 unit.
For a single family.
Then you have 40,000 for a 2-family,
No,
or 20,000
per dwelling.
so per dwelling. But then for a multiplex, it's 30,000 per dwelling. Is that correct?
I did see that.
I
yeah.
think that might be a place where you'd want to adjust so that it's equal. So it's 20 for each unit.
Because of the conflict between the 2-family and the multiplex.
I think this is a bit of a gray area, but I think that it might be in your benefit to be more permissive with the multiplex or the multifamily. And I would just say make it, you could do, there are multiple ways you could do this, but if you make it equal to 20,000 as you do for the 2-family. And then, so that adjustment would be, you need 60,000 for a multiplex.
So
in the
I want
first
to
column.
put this on the table, this discussion for the 2 to 4 units.
Yeah.
The Growth Planning Committee has not looked at that particular bucket yet. So I just wanted to make that as a caveat. That's not going to be on part of the town vote for this upcoming July.
I just didn't want to lose the opportunity of
Yep. Yeah, you have to stay
having
here.
you here. And
Do you want to go over the rest of the buckets, then we'll.
Sure. So that's the middle bucket, and I do think that's the most confusing bucket of all of them. So the
I don't agree, but
just based on the questions we received from other towns, but you seem like you definitely know your stuff already. So
we're studying.
the third bucket, the one on the far left, is the affordable housing density bonus. So this bucket applies to municipalities that have zoning, have density requirements, and allow multifamily housing, or in your case, what you call multiplex, in certain residential zones. And generally speaking, if this would apply to your community in the sense that you would allow developers to take advantage of a density bonus, which is 2.5 times your base density. So I could be wrong, but I think in your local ordinance, you said for multiplex that you allow like anywhere from 6 to 8 units. So that would be, depending on if it's 6 or 8, 6 to 8, it would be 2.5 times that 6 or 8 number for how many units that a developer could take advantage of this bonus. But we're only talking about here affordable housing developments, which has a very specific definition in the state law that is defined further by the federal government. So it's not all multiplex developments, it would be affordable developments as defined by the state law. In order to qualify for this bonus, 51% or more of the units must be affordable. And that's the definition that is provided in the statute. The development must be located in an area with zoning and in an area that allows multifamily, or in your case, multiplex. And these developments are allowed in growth areas or areas with public water and sewer. So some communities, those are one and the same, other communities, they're not, so it's important to know that that's an or statement.
And we had talked or the growth committee had talked, because that was one of the things, right, Galen, where water and sewer is down at the beach, but it's not zoned for multiplexes, so that kicked us out of.
So I'll show the illustration, that way
Yeah.
everyone's on the same page, if you don't mind going to the next slide. And we can go back and toggle, but this is, again, I made it color-coded. So you have the yellow area, which is areas in town of your zoning that are zoned for multiplex. So that they allow, either by condition or by permit, multiplexes, which is our multifamily. And then you have the growth areas, which are in blue. And then in the middle, you have where they intersect. So I used a color coding. Green means go. Yes, you get the bonus. Yellow means caution. You need public water and sewer for that area of the village residential east. And then anything that's blue is technically frozen, because even though it's in the growth area, it is not zoned for multiplex. And then you'll see at the very bottom, there's a little white box that is areas that aren't zoned for multiplex, not in your growth area, so they get no bonus either. So if an affordable housing wanted to go in there, they wouldn't get the bonus. That's how this visually would work. Any questions on that? Yes.
So we talked about this a little bit at the growth committee, and my initial concern was the definition of multifamily. The law specifically says multifamily, not multiplex, and you go look at government programs, sometimes they say 2 or more, sometimes they say 4 or 5 or more. If it's multiplex, then Goose Rocks doesn't get an affordable development. If multifamily is 2 families, more than 1, then I could envision, I don't know if it'll be profitable, but I could envision somebody saying I'm entitled to build an affordable development in the Goose Rocks area using standalone 2-family homes, not attached together, but if I've got a 10-acre parcel, I could go put some number of 2-family dwellings there, each of them on 40,000 square feet, and get the density bonus. And I saw that we're saying, no, we really mean multiplex here by multifamily. But Cape Elizabeth just went and passed their zoning ordinance, and they specifically define multifamily as 2 or more, and multiplex has 2 or more, as a matter of fact. So are we really okay with saying that multiplex, that 3 or more is what the law is intending?
I'd put it this way. Our rule defines multifamily as 3 or more units in one building.
Perfect.
But I should say that our office doesn't have enforcement over municipalities for this law. So we're here to provide technical assistance. So I should say that everything you decide to do should be run by your legal counsel for the town.
And of course we will, but I wanted to make sure we're heading down a road that was defensible. And is there afterwards, maybe you give me a source for where you say that?
Absolutely. So
We can lean on
I
that.
think if on the previous slide at the bottom, there's an email address that's housing.decd@maine.gov, as well as a website. That's the email address is the email I share with my colleague Ben. So we both check that regularly, and then the Housing Opportunity Program website, we both update, and that's where you'll find our set of rules that went through the formal rulemaking process as defined by the state.
Okay.
So Galen, that's something that we would define, right, as we talked in the growth?
Yeah, we added that. And
Yeah.
if we can go to the third slide, I'll go over where we're at in the process. So here's where we are. We talked about the first bucket with accessory apartments. This provision was updated in 2023. I guess the town voted that through with the accessory apartments. But there was questions in the growth planning committee and concerns about stormwater and nonconformance. So that was something that was addressed with LD 1706. What do we do with nonconforming parcels that do not currently either they're over lot coverage or those issues? How do we address the accessory apartment since it doesn't meet your density requirements? And so we added the statutory language in there for LD 1706 that basically says if it's a non-conforming lot, they can do an accessory apartment internally, but if it's going to make the lot more non-conforming, they can't do it. So it's keeping us in compliance with our land use ordinance. We also established a 1 per lot rule for accessory apartments. So, given that scenario that Ed mentioned earlier, if someone wants to put single-family dwellings and put 10 of them on one parcel, what's the issue with that? And I gave an example to the Growth Planning Committee at the last meeting that when it comes to enforcement down the line in the future, okay, which one of these is an accessory apartment? Which one of these is a dwelling unit? Just at that point, subdivide the lot, make it nice, clean lot lines, and you can have your accessory apartment for each one of those lots. That's how we defined that. So that is something new for the provision. The next bucket, which is, again, the next bucket we showed with the Venn diagram, is the affordable housing bonus. This one is, sorry, if you can go back to that slide. We added the new definition for what affordable housing is. Household and average median income was added. We also added the bonus language to explain the 2.5 times how that would work. And then the other thing that I think that wasn't really touched on was the parking standards. So LD 2003 requires us to have 2 parking spaces for every 3 units, which is different than what your current standards are of 2 per dwelling.
This is just for affordable housing developments
Yep.
now. The
Yep.
first bucket, the
Yes.
leftmost bucket.
Yes. And so the parking standards is going to be changed, and you have all the language in front of you in a packet. It says 0.66. That's unfortunately, that's the only way we can calculate it to make it work. So we can't require more than 0.66 parking spaces per unit that is being proposed by a developer when it goes to the planning board for subdivision review.
Can you help me understand how do you envision that working? It just surprises me that would be functional if we had three units, and you're saying that you can't have at least a parking spot for each unit. So people are going to work. I mean, it just to me that doesn't sound right. That sounds like a problem ready to happen. What am I missing in the logic here?
John, that's not a maximum. That's the minimum we can require of a developer. You still got to sell these.
Yeah.
Right?
So
So wouldn't you think if you were buying one of these and it's going to be expensive, even though it's affordable, that you're going to want enough parking for the one vehicle maybe you have, and maybe there's a visitor spot as well, and the law only lets us require a certain minimum, but that doesn't mean that the developer can't provide more than that.
Let me understand that again, though. Each unit has at least one, does not have one, right?
Correct.
Can you
Yep.
give us some?
2 out of 3,
Yeah, if you want to.
So, for 6 units, you've got 4 parking spaces.
minimum.
Yeah. And if you have 8, it would be technically 5. You can't make it 5 1/4.
And you're saying minimum, so in other words, we can't require them to have more, but
Nope,
they'd
they
have a
can-
tough time maybe selling them if they
One
were
would think,
Yep.
not thinking forward.
when you look at what it costs to buy an affordable house, remember the average median income, and I'm going to ask a question about this for your help in a minute, but it's like $97,000 here. So it's a
got the
family making
80%, right.
$97,000 is going to buy one of these, maybe 20% more than that,
Well, the 80% of that, I think, is what would-
if for renting, yeah.
I think for purchase, but go ahead.
Well, do I have it backwards?
It's all right, but
Okay.
it's, yeah.
But in the vicinity of 100 grand.
Yeah,
This is not subsidized housing we're
No,
talking
indeed.
about. This is-
Indeed.
Even more the reason why
Which-
people have cars.
Yeah, which means they're gonna have cars. This is a part. But
No,
your
good
point is that it's a minimum, and if someone was foolish, and we can't force them to do the right thing or the logical thing, is what it says. But, all right.
Yeah.
Well, the houses are there. They'll sell them, and they'll be backing up and parking on streets and everything else. It'll be parking on the lawn. for crying out- I still
Again,
don't
John,
get
part
the
of this
logic
is,
to it.
before we get excited. I don't know that there's that many places in town that are going to be conducive to this, but given that there are, I think you put your finger on one of the concerns.
Can you help us?
I think that's an accurate statement, how you put it, that the ordinance cannot require more than 2 parking spaces for every 3 units, but that doesn't stop the developer from adding more units.
But what's the purpose behind that part of the law? That it just doesn't make sense to us.
I am not, so I started
I
after.
don't mean to put you on the
No, no, no.
spot.
I should just say that I started after the legislature had already passed this piece of legislation, so I'm certainly not the
Sorry.
right person to provide some background on this. Generally, my understanding is that it's trying to think about putting affordable housing developments in areas that might be walkable,
Yeah, which
to
we don't
encourage less
Have public
cars.
transportation, which we
Right.
have so much of.
Right.
Yeah.
So what is the issue if so the state, the state put forward a mandate or the law, and then it's a very high level. So what stops us from saying, okay, in general, we're 90% there, or 99 or 98% there, but we just need relief for the parking. And so we're not gonna go to that parking, 0.66. We want, 1-to-1. I mean, can we get some guidance from the state if that's something that we can try?
Well,
Or,
the state's here, but.
but I didn't know, I didn't wanna I put her on the
Right,
spot
right.
once. I didn't
Here's
wanna
what
do it
I
twice.
would say about that. That is a direct sentence in the piece of legislation. So I would say, my department is not going to come after you if you decide to do something different. However, I think that enforcement might come from a community member or somebody else who disagrees with what you decide to do in local ordinance. So that's generally how we've been providing guidance to towns, is that you might leave yourself open to litigation if you do not follow what is written in the law.
So I'll give you a little bit of perspective. There's a good book, a planning book out there, and it's easy to read. It's called Paved Paradise, if anyone's interested in reading it. It's about how local zoning has been very much centered around the automobile and just parking, and how we estimate our parking standards, and we have no complete idea of our inventory for what we have for parking inventory in our community. And so other communities across the country have identified that parking spaces can cause up the cost of development, especially for affordable housing projects, in the upward directions of about $20,000 to $30,000 per parking space. And so I think this is more of an issue in more densely urban areas like New York City and Portland and those areas than in Kennebunkport. I think developers aren't going to see that as a huge cost issue. They're probably going to put in the 2 spaces per unit. We just can't mandate it by the state. So, and again, the state is trying to address an issue that's a statewide issue. So this is probably more of an issue in, again, more urban centers than in more spread out areas like Kennebunkport.
So Galen, on the, or anyone, on the affordable housing piece, the 51%, and it goes back to timing for me. So there's nothing in the law, or maybe state's guidance, but, so I go back to doing the math, right? So if we have 40 growth permits a year, we have 20 in our growth area, and a developer comes into our growth area and says, we want to do affordable housing. So at most, they could be doing 20 units. And so say this developer is going to put in a 100-unit housing development. And they have to do 51% affordable. But can we actually impose other things? Because I have this vision that a developer might come in here and they might do the unaffordable, the market-based housings first. And we're not going to get to the affordable part until years out. So I didn't see anything in the law. Would we want to think about doing a 1-for-1 or, something that we get the affordable part first in a housing development versus waiting 5 to 10 years for that development to get to maturity or get over that 49%, and now we start seeing affordable. So that's the first part. The second part is, I don't see anything that says it's like a 1-for-1 for sizes, right? So can a developer go in there and put what's a unit? So can a developer go in and do the mini McMansions for the market-based side, and then one-bedroom condos for the affordable side? So this is where I was trying to envision what this affordable thing is, and can we add things maybe potentially to make it so that we get affordable?
Okay, great questions. I might have some of the answers. We might have to do some research on some of the other ones. Regarding the 51% requirement, that is a one-to-one requirement from the state. I've dealt with this with other housing projects. So generally speaking, if it was a duplex they were putting in, 51% would technically be only 50% for main housing. Don't know why, that's what they required of it. But if it's 3 units, they would again require at least 2 of those to be, because it's 51%. That's a state of Maine and HUD recommendation, so they have to follow those. That's part of their financing for these affordable housing projects. I can only speak for HUD funds and federal funds. If you are building new units for affordable housing, you have to meet they have like a gold standard of construction. So that has to have granite countertops. You can't skip and give them laminate. You have to give them what the market would be for these units. So that's a requirement of federal funds.
Okay,
Someone doing it privately, I don't know what the requirements would be for that. But
So
that's-
And I think Mary Beth's point is our growth permit limit
Yep.
layered on top of that. So you can't do a whole I mean, 100 is a lot, but let's say you're gonna do 8. And so, could somebody using the growth, because you're only gonna be able to do so many a year, in all likelihood.
Yeah, so the only question that I would, again, from an enforcement perspective with the 51%, I don't know if we have that mechanism of, okay, who's gonna go around to make sure that this unit right here is being used for affordable housing versus not. It's a concern that I raised with the state on how we're going to address this. There will be a deed restriction in there that says 51% of the units have to be used for the affordable housing requirement. So that's in there. Regarding the growth permits allow up to 7 permits max for that zone by the developer to be issued at one time. If there's any excess left over at the end of the year, they can certainly apply for it. And there are a percentage earmarked in each zone for affordable housing. So that's already baked in. So if someone was coming in to do affordable housing, there was already certain permits
It's
earmarked for
10%,
Galen,
I
is the
think,
permit per
are
dwelling?
reserved for affordable each year.
Yeah.
That's only 4. If they're not used, they can go to,
But can we, so I guess I'm sorry, I'm just not internalizing.
I'm with you.
So can we ask them, can we put it in our ordinance, or is it fair to say, can you build your affordables first? Or at least simultaneously? That's not in the law right
Mary
now.
Beth-
It was 1-to-1, I thought.
No, but it's what does 1-to-1 mean? I guess that's what I missed.
So they would have to do it 51% of the units. So if it was a two-family.
So wait, so let's just say they got 7 permits, so they got 7 permits for this first year. And then the 7 permits, and so they're actually, let's say they're gonna build 20 units altogether. And so they got 7 permits for year 1. Are those
4 of the units have to be for affordable.
for year 1?
Right.
Okay, perfect. So that's in the law somewhere, okay.
That is in HUD regulations for
Okay.
51%.
So now if I'm a private developer,
Can't speak to that. I don't.
can we put something in to ensure that we get it even if it's a private developer?
How are we going to enforce it, Mary Beth?
I have no idea.
That's where I'm,
but
that's,
if it's,
Can
Galen,
you-
do we
can you
use
help- can
subdivision
someone help
regs?
us
Do we have a
understand what-
separate section for affordable housing subdivisions that would,
well, it's easy if it's a subdivision, because you could put a deed restriction in if you're selling the unit.
because these are all going to be subdivisions, right?
Aren't
They're gonna have to
all
go through-
affordables under deed restrict? That's a piece I'm not understanding.
yes. So the
So
municipality has to, it's in the state statute that the municipality has to have some sort of mechanism to protect those units for at least 30 years.
Exactly, so we know, so you do know. You know exactly which ones are affordable.
Well,
What am I missing?
If it's a rental versus, if you're selling them off. If you're selling them off, then Unit 6 is going to be deed restricted as a affordable up front. If it's all stays as one parcel, it's an apartment, multiplex, then the restriction would just apply to the whole development. And the question is, well, how do you know that when Unit 2 re-rents, that it's going to
this
be
has to do with
re-rented.
Even up
rentals
front
and
as they're
not
doing-
deeded not individually deeded properties. So the issue is, I see.
Yes.
I think what Mary Beth is saying, if I'm hearing this, and it's a concern as well, someone has approval to build 8 units on a subdivision, half of which will be affordable, half of which will be market-based. They build the first 4. And they sell them in market-based.
2 and 2, it's got to be.
It has to be 2 and 2.
Well, he's,
50
According to
it's
HUD.
51%. So, take whatever number it is, 7 divided by 2.
So they have to
is-
build them
is
one by
3.5,
one,
so it's
one by-
4. So 4 of the units have to be for affordable.
But if I build the 4 market-based up front, and I'm gonna build the next 4 next year, but then things happen and they never get built.
right.
No. you
They
would
have
still-
to be built one by one.
Correct.
Thank you.
But even for private, non-HUD.
I can't, I
Yeah, so-
don't know what.
So that's that's
So-
the thing.
Yeah, that
Yes,
seems to
can
be
we
the
use our
gap.
subdivision regs to require that?
Do private, you need the
So
subsidy.
listen,
Can-
you're gonna have to raise your hand, and Galen will call on you, because we're talking over each other.
Okay.
So Dan was talking, I thought.
Yes.
So subdivision regs.
Yes.
Every one of these will have to go through subdivision, right? Can we write our subdivision regs to require some additional requirements for affordable housing in order to meet the spirit of the law, to ensure that there's an equal building, to whoever's, doesn't matter who's providing the funding, that they're built equally at least, or 51% for every one that's being developed.
Right. We have a residential development performance standards, which is where most of your language is right now, and certainly that's something we can add in there, if that's a concern. Again, it's,
Yeah, it seems to be.
from a code enforcement perspective, I don't know how we're going to enforce, especially if it's private, I don't know how we're going to enforce that.
Well, we could require in the subdivision regs that they're gonna identify the specific units,
I'm
that
actually,
you have to know that
you're-
information. That's a requirement. Otherwise, you don't get approval. Right?
it's the follow-up inspection. How are you inspecting to make sure that tenant is, that's where I'm saying from an enforcement perspective, I think it's gonna be hard for our code
Well,
officers to
it'll
do
be
that.
hard, just as hard for everybody though in the state,
Right.
right? So hopefully there'll be a state support on that, but, it's the same problems we have with every one of the things that we try to control where we don't license it and so forth, right? So, thank you.
So I think this is like feeling the elephant, right? The different aspects of it. This issue of what is affordable and how is it enforced, it has multiple aspects to it. I sent Galen a note earlier saying, I'm trying to imagine somebody coming to the planning board and saying, hey, I want to build an affordable development. Well, what I know right now is that this year in Kennebunkport, the average median income, you can look it up, the HUD website, is 97.5. And then there's an 80-120 thing on that. But what does that mean to a developer today? What's he going to be able to sell his house for? Who is it that's going to say, okay, is that for a 4-member household, for example? What about if it's only a 2-member household? Is the AMI,
Yeah, it's total, You don't have to put alimony or anything else, but it's what everybody.
No, it's not the question. If you look at the HUB website, it says, here's the AMI, the average for our area, it's 97.5, and adjustments are made for smaller and larger households. And I thought, so am I gonna target for a 2-member household and then sell to a 6-member household?
So I think a better resource actually might be looking at Maine Housing's website, because they do break it up by household size, the area median income by your area.
Right, so if you do, now you made it even tougher. You said, okay, so I'm gonna make I'm gonna build a 1-bedroom, I'm gonna target that at a 3-member household, right, or two-member, a man and his spouse, a woman and her spouse. Oh, I'm gonna have a 2-bedroom, that's gonna be I'm gonna sell that for a different price. It's targeted at a 3-member. Well, that's all well and good, but what is the planning board gonna say or are they even gonna ask the question that says, well, what are you gonna sell these for? And I think all we can do right now is say, and you're gonna have to sell these in concert with Maine Housing's guidelines in terms of what someone will pay for it, which, by the way, might be different next year by the time you market these houses. The whole process just has this cloud on it for me that makes it very hard to do anything more than codify in their deed restriction that it's got to be affordable, and that some agency, and is that some agency in the town? Is it the code enforcement office? Is it some yet identified person in the town that's going to have purview over this that says, oh, and by the way, every time the town is going to have an interest on this, we're going to be listed on the deed, and when this deed is transferred, we're going to get to weigh in, we're going to have to weigh in and spend time and money and energy on saying, we want to make sure that it's still affordable, that it's sold to somebody that is, has the imprimatur of, be it Maine Housing or whoever else. And I, for the life of me, I'm having a hard time seeing how that process is going to work. From the get-go at planning board through the 30 years that the town, right now, the law says the town is accountable for either giving this to someone else or managing it themselves to make sure these properties stay affordable.
Yep. Nina?
I think that the same way that the planning board, when they get a subdivision application, doesn't really look at costs, but the costs have to be put in by the applicant. It's going to be the applicant's burden to show that it's affordable housing, and it's going to be the code enforcement office that's going to look at that and probably enforce that the way we have it set up with the planning board.
But it's a set of skills maybe that they don't practice today with respect to, is
But-
this affordable? So they might, you might
And
need.
Let's
they
raise
may
our
make
hands, folks.
mistakes. They may make mistakes, but basically you do the best that you can. At least you've got a starting point at which to look at it and say, applicant, you've calculated correctly or you haven't calculated correctly.
So what I would envision with, I know that's a concern, is we would require, if an affordable housing project were to go before the planning board, we would require them to have some sort of language, because it says in the statute that the municipality has to agree to the language that is going to preserve those units for 30 years or more. And so that would be something that's a supplemental that goes to the planning board in their packet, just like an HOA agreement. It's a similar requirement. They're going to review it, but when it comes to enforcement, the code enforcement office is going to have to enforce it. Yes, Dan?
Yeah, and I would just suggest that we try to write into the subdivision regs associated with affordable housing density project, that we put the mechanism in that they need to notify the code enforcement officer when there's a change in rent. That they need to notify when they're gonna sell the home, if it's for sale, whether it's a rental or for personal use, what they're gonna be selling it for, so that there can be an assessment that it's still affordable in 2035, whenever that takes place. We at least put that in the regs. It's obviously meeting the spirit of what the requirements are that the state has implemented on us with the LD 2003. So I would think they would support that, unless they come up with the state comes up with another mechanism. But you're right, you need some way of tracking this.
Right.
And so it should put it on the onus of the owner of that property to ensure that we're notified.
The burden of proof is always on the developer to satisfy the requirements before they get approval from the municipality.
So,
Yep.
sorry. So can we go back to the mini McMansions and the condo? So I know that they both can have granite countertops, but is there any mechanisms to make sure that these are going to be affordable houses and not one-bedroom apartments that count as a unit? I just want to make sure that we're going to get an affordable house and not a one-bedroom house, and then right down the street, the one that counted for the market base is a very big house. So they have to have the same look and feel, but can we state that it has to be at least a two-bedroom unit, or?
No, you can't make requirements for those types of structural standards for number of rooms. But again, if they're going through HUD, any kind of HUD funds, whether it's Maine Housing or other HUD funds, they're going to have to build to the same specs. I've seen these developments go forward, and they're all about the same square footage for each unit. Whether it's a two-bedroom equivalent, they're both going to look exactly identical, even though one's market rate, one's not. So they're
So
gonna,
does anybody build here that's non-HUD? Have we had any, do we know of any affordable housing in Maine that has been done privately and not through HUD that we would be concerned? So I think what you're telling me is
Yep,
that
yep.
we don't need to be concerned about this.
I don't know of any housing projects that are going on that are affordable housing that are privately funded. I'm sure there's probably something out there, but I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know of any.
I would just say, in order to make housing, whether it's an apartment building or single-family units, affordable, they need all those incentives, because otherwise they can't get the costs down. I don't know what the state thinks, Hillary, but I mean, I'm not saying there's not somebody out there who hasn't done one, but, I mean, the vast majority, to me, are taking advantage of every incentive they can.
I think that's accurate to my understanding as well, but I certainly am not knowledgeable about every single housing development that has gone up in the past 15 years, so maybe there's an exception, but I generally think people are looking for that subsidy from HUD or Maine State Housing or any other source that they can find.
Okay, so it's a subsidy thing, okay. Well, I'm just worried about it.
And then I mentioned the last bucket is the 2 to 4 units. This is the last part of the slide. 2 to 4 units, we briefly touched upon that, but we are not covering that until November. There's a lot of questions surrounding it. We just wanted to focus on those first 2 buckets. So that was the end of my presentation for that. So we open up the floor to any other questions. Yes, Ed?
I think I just learned something about that, you were saying this, I had envisioned that an affordable complex, one of the ways you made it affordable was by having some units that you would be able to market at a higher price because they maybe had granite countertops, and some others didn't, and you would be able to make those more affordable. I haven't seen anything in the law that precluded that or even pushed you away from that.
That's the HUD part of it.
That's through HUD regulations.
Well, maybe you're not marketing the ones that are higher than affordable through HUD finance loans. You're selling those open market just like you would any other home in Kennebunkport today. And whoever is buying the more modestly priced homes is a different financier. I'm not sure how HUD weighs into this.
Yeah, that would be, again, that's highly technical. I'm not the
Okay.
person to answer those questions.
No,
Usually, I mean, Ed, usually when you're doing a development of this nature, you're doing a mix, like you said.
Yeah.
But certainly in that mix, you're going for that HUD or that Main State Housing incentive, and that overlays on your entire
For all of it.
development.
I didn't appreciate that before. Thank you.
But it sounds like to me that the houses are gonna be the same, but it sounds like the developer's gonna have to give a discount for the HUD houses, and they're gonna be the same houses, right?
Yep.
Isn't that correct?
Yep, they get a federal subsidy, through HUD or Maine Housing, it's indirectly. And then that's what makes it more affordable. They're driving down the cost of that. So that, the federal taxes, were used or incentivized to make it more cost-effective.
And that's true for affordable housing, not just subsidized and low-income housing.
Right. That's voucher programs and everything else. That's totally different. Yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, I have just a question. So the thought occurs to me as we're discussing this. Okay, so we have a 4-bedroom, lovely McMansion located on a lot, and next to it we have, I don't know, two or three other units to satisfy all the requirements, okay, of affordable housing. Okay, so this is actually, I know this in personal experience, okay? So let's take a look at the 4-bedroom house. So it's very expensive compared to the duplex next to it, okay? What's to prevent the owner of the 4-bedroom house to rent out each bedroom as an affordable unit, knowing that the occupants, whoever occupies each of those 4 bedrooms is going to share a bathroom down the hall. Would that be called affordable housing? Or would that just be called renting out your house? How would that be classified?
I believe in your land use code, that's a rumor.
No,
so that's
I
all-
know of a case where this is actually going on right now. Not in this state, somewhere else. Oh, sorry.
Right.
Oh,
I don't know if that would be, that's not an affordable housing, yeah.
sorry. Okay, so I'm sorry?
That's not an affordable housing,
That's not affordable housing?
no.
It's a boarding house.
Yeah,
Boarding.
rooming house.
That would be, that would require a different permit for,
Yep.
It does now.
Would be
if
license.
the owner wanted to convert his 4-bedroom house.
Yeah, we have a
to boarding
license
house.
for that.
So I mean, that could happen, I guess. You could have a boarding house located next to affordable housing?
I guess anything's possible, but it has to be licensed.
Okay, well, yeah.
Yeah. It's not taking part of the density, like that's a totally different thing.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Yeah, the density
Thank you.
If I recall correctly, the rumor only allows 1 bedroom, right? So you wouldn't be able to rent all 4
No.
legally.
Legally.
Not that folks don't always do things legally. Plus, the owner has to live there. It'd be on premise.
So does Hillary have any words of wisdom for us as we move forward?
I think you're in really good shape. Galen had sent me some of the proposed edits or sort of, what he was thinking about adding based on LD 2003 and LD 1706, and I think you're in good shape. I think it's maybe just discussing a little bit more about your dimensional requirements table and those minimum lot size requirements. That was really the one big thing I noticed. And then reviewing definitions is always important, as you know from your discussions tonight, just making sure that definitions are where you want them to be, and clear to distinguish between an accessory dwelling unit and a dwelling unit and multiplex, 2-family, things like that. But otherwise, I think you're in really good shape. And since, as you mentioned, you already allow much of this to occur, so it's not a huge leap compared to other municipalities who are not quite as far along in the process.
Thank you.
So where are we now, Galen?
Where are we now? So you have the language that's in front of you. It's all in your packet. I wanted to see if there's any other guidance that you'd like to provide GPC or Planning Board, because right now the language that's been submitted is what's in front of you. That is going to the town's attorney right now to be reviewed, so we're making sure that legally we're going to be in good shape. But if there's anything else that you'd like to address before the Board of Selectmen decide to hold a public hearing, now's the time to state your piece. Yes, Jane?
I think there's been some discussion about the growth area itself and whether we need to take another look at that in terms of whether we should adjust what is considered the growth area. Just because downtown Kennebunkport is really a tourist area. It's not a downtown area like most towns have, and also the flooding issues that we've had. I don't know, we have discussed maybe eliminating parts of that area for more growth, and we really don't know which parcels or lots would be eligible for some of this growth for the denser housing.
So going through that process, the town just approved its comprehensive plan, which included the growth maps that were established. Generally speaking, the growth area does follow where public infrastructure currently exists. It's the community's vision, so the community decided this is where they wanted growth to be located. So exploring that would be that would require action by the Board of Selectmen, that they would direct us to really explore modifying that. I would advise against that, just because you had just recently adopted your vision as a community, and that requires going through a public vote process. So that's just again, opening up something that I don't know what the concern is in changing the growth area, particularly. I mean, that's what I'm.
I guess it's hard for me to envision or know which lots, where is the growth, I guess it's maybe mainly the 2 to 4 units in the affordable housing. They're only going to be available on certain lots, especially like the 4 units.
But they have to meet your density currently.
Right.
So that's nothing's changing there. In your existing land use code, they can do 4 more units, as we discussed, as long as they're meeting your net residential density for that area. And that excludes wetlands and other right-of-ways.
We're not really likely to see a lot of that in our growth area.
I mean, right. Yeah.
As an example, let's say the village residential. How many lots in the village residential currently might qualify for this? Is there an inventory of some sort? Are there a dozen? Are there 0? Are there 100?
I know in your comprehensive plan, it does have, there was a study that was done on what's the potential units that you can have in each zone. So that is available, and we did send that out to the members. Certainly, it's something I can pull up. But yeah, there is an inventory that was done to go over that.
So I was in favor of re-looking at the growth map, and I'll tell you why. Because when I looked for the genesis of how it came up and asked the growth committee, and it really was looked at using the lens of 1,000 feet away from being able to hook up to sewer. And so that was, at the time, that's what the town had looked at, or that's what the growth committee had looked at and developed that. Fast forward, now the state comes down and says, okay, thou shalt be able to do this in the growth area. And so when we were going through this process within the growth committee, that was my unease point, where I just wanted to take a breath and relook at the map, because now that this has happened from the state and said this is what you can do in your growth area, which is not how anyone in the community voted for that comprehensive plan, with the understanding of that's what that growth area was going to be used for. So I would actually like to, like I said, just take a breath, look at the growth map again, and just say, is there areas that we know are known flooding, like Jane said, known traffic issues, because we look at the differences of us versus other towns, which has already been brought up in a number of points. And we don't have major roads. We have small side streets. And so I'm just envisioning the future, and I cannot sit back and say to any resident that saw me and said, paint me the picture of what the town's going to look like after this. I can't do it. And I know after our discussions, it may not be a lot of impact in certain areas, but I don't know that. And that's where my uncomfortable is. It's not that we're not going to do this. I just want to make sure that, and I understand exactly what you said, Galen, and I agree with what you said. I just personally am uncomfortable because I know that we're the group of people looking at this, and that the residents think that if I was a resident outside and then came in to pull the lever, I would have thought that somebody had really looked at the growth area in that vein, not just as 1,000 feet from a sewer. That was my uneasiness.
Just because of the higher density? Is that what you're?
Yeah, just because of the higher density, and then just the stuff that we're actually actively looking at within the town, which is, where is the rising water coming in and washing out stuff, and where do we just have to be conscious of? So it feels like, we're moving to become something, and we are the people that should be looking at this to make sure that we've done this level of due diligence. And I don't want to slow the process down, but at the same time, I don't know what that looks like. And when I asked a question of how this map was developed, and it's 1,000 feet from sewer, that's not the answer for what, it was looked at it versus are we really going to grow in LD 2002 and increase our density. So that's, I'm not trying to push back at what you said. I completely understand, but that's my feeling of my uneasiness here.
How much increase in density do we really anticipate? I thought I was hearing that most of this can be done anyway, and it hasn't been done already, so am I missing a piece there?
So it is limited to the certain areas that we went over in the Venn diagram. So that green area and the yellow area, that's the zones that it's really where it's concentrated.
Right.
So those areas right there are where, and I think that's probably where most of the, growth is in town. Historically, that's where most folks lived and most businesses were located in town. Were in those zones. Again, people may have more institutional knowledge than I do, but that's generally the area that we're talking about. And so with LD 2003, it would be a 2.5 times whatever the base density is for those respective zones.
For affordable.
For affordable.
Yep. For affordable.
For affordable housing.
Everything else is, yep.
I think
keep
that's
going.
gonna be a relatively small,
Most expensive rate.
Yeah.
exactly.
Yes, that's a
Yeah.
huge barrier towards any kind of construction is the high cost of land, especially in Kennebunkport, is something the rest of the state doesn't have those challenges. The state has the challenges of labor costs and material costs for new construction. And with Kennebunkport and its land costs, that's another barrier towards affordable housing in our community. So I think it's going to be a lot more limited than what we really think
Yeah,
it's going to
I
be.
just don't see the problem.
Yep.
I had a question for Hillary. We talked, I want to make sure I get this right. So developer wants to build 10 affordable houses out of 20, whatever the number comes out to be, in a development. So the affordable houses have to be the same quality of the market rate housing. Is that what we said?
So there's nothing in LD 2003 that's specifying what these units need to consist of, or if they need to be single-family, or they need to be one unit, or two-family. There's no, or granite countertops. There's nothing in LD 2003. I think, as to Galen's point, those are set by HUD or Maine State Housing that would place those
Okay,
requirements.
so I understand that. So there is a difference. I mean, same quality, one's affordable, one's a market rate. Do we have any developers in the state of Maine that you're aware of that are doing that in large developments?
I certainly can do some research and get back to Galen, but I don't know
Because,
off the top of my head right now.
The reason I ask the question is I have met with a developer who does a lot of market rate condos and houses and so forth. And his whole thing is with us was, to have a developer have a great deal of affordable housing in a development, it's density, density, density. So it's got to be some kind of, smaller lots or whatever it is, and then maybe the market rate has bigger lots. I don't know how it goes. But I just curious is if there's anybody in the state of Maine on a large basis who's doing development that is doing affordable housing, HUD-related stuff versus market rate in the same development, and how's it going?
I'm not on the development end, but I probably could connect you with
Yeah, I just curious to
some people
know.
through Maine State Housing.
Because I think it's very difficult. When I was on the planning board years ago, we took a look at when we did redid the subdivision regulations. This is back in the early 2000s. We looked at trying to do exactly that, have 2 units out of 10 or some. It was not LD 2003, but we were trying to come up with like 20%. It's going to be affordable, et cetera, et cetera. We got into the whole thing of trying to make it work with how would we make it work with a developer, et cetera, and then how do you manage it over years or inspect it or whatever. So I'm just curious. I'd like, I think LD 2003 is it's going to cause some pain for some people. I'm just wondering if it's been really thought through.
There are certainly developers doing affordable housing, and I do think that it is a challenge for them to make units affordable just based on things like, as Galen mentioned, labor costs and supply costs. I think it is a challenge, and the numbers shift, it sounds like, on a regular basis, so it's hard to sort of lock in at a certain price. But I would be happy to come up. I think I know a couple offhand, but I'm happy to do some more research.
I would
and
just
send
like
it
to see
Galen.
some examples.
Yeah.
I think it's difficult. for a
I
developer.
think it is, in
Yeah.
in this economic environment, I think
Yeah.
it is a challenge, for sure.
I mean, I'll give you a personal example. So in Presque Isle, we had a housing developer that was based in New Jersey, and the city gave him the land. And he still was struggling to make the numbers work.
Yeah.
How many units was he looking at?
That was 27 units. So, oh, sorry, whose hand? Yep.
No, I was just going to comment that it would be very nice if there were such developers to have one come in and talk about what it takes, basically, to build affordable housing and not lose your shirt.
It's, the people we talked to were concerned about the infrastructure costs,
That's the big one.
which was the big one, and that's why it was density, 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 and so forth,
Right.
so,
Roads
yeah,
are very expensive
Yeah.
today.
yeah.
So I did have one other question. So, well, I think I saw where the affordable housing could be supported either by wells and septic or by city water and city sewer, right? So the question that came to my mind is the city actually tracking total capacity, current demand, and the amount of capacity that's available for future development? I mean, how do you know when you get overloaded on both of those?
Right, so that's a good question. I guess there's two answers. Code enforcement office will look at building permit applications. If they need to go on public sewer, water, they have to get a letter from the superintendent of the water district and from Public Works to make sure that they have capacity. So that department has to sign off that there's capacity. If they decide to put a septic tank in, the local plumbing inspector, which is your code enforcement officer, goes out and makes sure that what is being proposed is meeting the number of bedrooms that is being proposed by the developer. So in either case, yes, they have to make sure that it meets capacity.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Ed?
May I just, at the risk of exposing my ignorance, could someone help me understand the growth permits that we were talking about earlier, and whether one is required per dwelling unit, or is it one per lot, or one per application, or what? How is that, how does that work? That isn't something that comes before the planning board, so we don't see it, but help me understand what the limitation is on the number of developments, and how do we quantify that?
Yep, it's one, good question. So the growth permit is, one is required per dwelling unit. And so they have to provide it as part of their building permit application. They check box on there that they want a growth permit.
Yeah.
They can ask for a max of 7 right up front. If they want more, they have to wait until December if there's any left in the zone. There's also a transfer provision. So if there are growth permits left in the rural part of your growth areas, they can be transferred to the transitional zone, and transitional can go to growth. However, you can't go the reverse direction.
By the code enforcement office?
Yes, and that's
Yeah,
at the
you
end of the
manage
year in
that.
December. Yep.
So right now, comes to the planning board, many of these subdivisions, I say most of the subdivision reviews we do, don't involve dwelling units. They involve a subdivision of the lots. And later, the dwelling units and those permits must be issued then.
Yep.
This affordable housing development in particular would require a subdivision review because it's 3 dwelling units within a 5-year period. And we would be talking about this metering of affordables don't all come at the end after all of the more expensive units and the like. It would have to be metered. Thank you. That's very helpful.
I've seen subdivisions too where they phase their developments over so many years to figure that out. So
You'd have to here, yeah?
Yep.
Okay.
John.
You know, I've heard some concern in the community about, an explosion of building because of these regulations. Currently, what is the number that are available per year?
It's 40.
It's 40. And how often do we have any left over?
I'd have to.
I'm sorry, in the past, Lori, what's it been?
I'd say there's been some years where we've had some growth areas left over.
Yeah.
Because the rural areas tend to go first.
Yeah.
I think the past couple of years, we might have built-out capacity.
Yeah, so there's maybe some pressure to increase that, but not a huge amount. And it's 40 units a year, 40 dwelling units a year.
I just
Just so
wanted,
people understand that we're not talking about hundreds of building, units exploding all at once.
just wanted to make a note, though, that accessory dwelling units are exempt from rate of growth ordinance, just to be
Yeah.
clear about that.
Yeah, we don't require a growth permit for accessory apartments.
Paul has a question.
We got Paul.
Oh, sorry.
So, two things. Someone comes in for an accessory dwelling unit permit from you. They need that sewer sign-off for increased capacity or not?
So for, is that, you said accessory apartments?
Yes.
Yes, so they would require, because the sewer department would actually bill that separately. And similarly, if they also, if their septic tank is not large enough, we can require that they would have to have a second septic tank, or they could upgrade their existing one to make it compatible.
Got it.
Because it's based off the number of bedrooms.
Got it.
Yeah.
And there is a formula. The Growth Planning Committee looks at the number 40 no less than every 2 years, I think. And it's based upon a 10-year number of the permits taken out, excluding affordables. So
Correct, yeah.
while you need a growth permit for an affordable unit, when you evaluate how many growth permits should be available, you do not count.
They're excluded from the calculation.
Right.
Yep. And there's elderly housing too, I believe.
Elderly, that's right. No,
So what does, can you take us through, what does then, how much does it increase then? Or what's the formula?
It's looking at 10-year period as to how many were taken out, I believe.
How many permits were used?
Yeah, I think,
We're actually, yeah, it's the average over,
I think it's 110% of the average over the last 10 years.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
there's a mechanism that it would slowly rise to 41 and
Okay.
42 if
So
we
it's,
kept hitting.
it's something that doesn't go back for vote, it's within the current
Right, 40's
ordinance.
the-
and
40's
it
the minimum.
just- it
it's
just
in the
keeps
ordinance.
happening.
The
in the
formula's
ordinance.
there.
Yep.
We would have to
Okay.
change the ordinance
Good.
and then change our comprehensive plan.
And
to reference that.
there's nothing within anything that, there's no override mechanism for that? I'm looking to see, there's changes from the state coming in, so I just wanted to understand if there's an override that would cause us to be able to go over the 10%, the 10-year average plus, 110% or whatever.
I mean, you can change the formula whenever you'd like.
But there's nothing within LD 2003
No.
or HUD or anything that we get money, or a developer gets money that they can come back and say, we need more growth permits.
Nope.
So we're 40 and,
Yeah. The exception is if someone came in with a 40-unit senior citizen project, they don't need growth permits.
How I best described it for the town of Kennebunkport is the only thing LD 2003 really touched your local zoning was about the affordable density. That's it.
Right.
They have still to meet setbacks, they still have to meet, all the other requirements of your zoning, your growth permits, all of that. The only thing it touched was the 2.5%. That's 2.5 times, sorry, 2.5 times.
250%.
Yes.
Any other questions? Any questions from the TV land?
We weren't taking questions.
We have Tracy Gear with her hand up. Tracy, you may speak.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Hi, Tracy.
Pleasure to be here virtually. I'm up in Augusta actually this week, so thanks for accommodating me virtually. I just really wanted to say thanks to everybody. As Hillary has been a fantastic resource for everyone in the state, and it's so great to see her helping out folks in our Kennebunkport. I wanted to make a couple of suggestions because I think it would be really helpful for all the folks that are working hard on housing issues to make sure that you're having somebody come in potentially and do a presentation about how affordable housing works. And, we've got Avesta that does a lot, and it has the several properties in Kennebunk. They're very qualified. We have our very own Heritage Housing Trust that works in these issues. And I think it would be really helpful for people to understand that there are sort of multiple dimensions that are involved here. One being how the projects are financed, and so people have touched in the last few comments about the fact that in order to achieve affordability by people with low incomes, there typically needs to be the involvement of some financing and some subsidy from HUD, from Maine Housing, from the state, in order to make those projects affordable. And that is one of the definitions of affordability that does relate to the being affordable to people and families at certain levels of area median income. So that there's the financing piece. There are also vouchers that enable people to have a voucher that supports their paying their rent in a property that is affordable, again, by those same conditions. And then there are examples in Maine of completely private for-profit development companies, developers doing this kind of development and the kind of mixed income development that was alluded to. So I think it would be really interesting for folks to maybe hear presentations and hear feedback and input from some of those folks. And I also wanted to just also say here that there is also a very clear distinction between housing for rentals and housing for ownership. And again, we have our very own Heritage Housing Trust that is focused on affordable homes for ownership. That's definitely a piece of this, but there's also a whole world of rental housing for rent that is, I think, very relevant for our community, but that has a whole different set of needs and requirements associated with it. So I just want to make those suggestions that it would be really interesting to make sure that folks working on the planning board and working in these really important volunteer roles in our community have the chance to hear from some of the folks doing some of the great development around the state and to really to start to figure out what might be the best kinds of ways to build housing for our community's needs, which are specific to us. So thanks to everyone for being there and for all the hard work.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Anybody else out there?
No other hands raised.
No other hands raised?
Oh, wait, Robin has raised her hand.
Robin, go ahead.
Yes, hello. This has been a very good session we put on. I feel like the last topic of the growth permits do not count with affordable housing, so we would keep 40, but then it could be unlimited. Is that correct, or is it, you know what I mean? Because the potential for growth that way, you know, might outpace us a little. So did I not understand that?
So the growth permits are, they are issued and they're earmarked. There is a certain portion that is earmarked for affordable housing, but they're not part of the calculation to determine the total number of growth permits.
The per year number.
Per year, yeah.
So to say that in more plain language.
Yes, sorry.
Use the mic, please.
The growth permits stay regardless of whether they're affordable housing. Affordable housing is not unlimited in growth permits or exceeds the max of growth permits. So the growth permits still provide that ceiling for number of permits issued a year.
Yep.
Do you understand that, Robin?
I had to mute her microphone because we were getting feedback.
Oh.
Oh.
Robin, can you hear us okay?
Hello?
Oh, there you are. Did that make sense?
It does. I just, when you, the mention of like a nursing home, 36, that would need a growth permit. And I thought that extended to all, you know, the other affordable housing. It just seemed like, you know, if we're going 1-to-1, if that's the way it is.
Right. No, the ceiling of growth permits still is in existence.
Yeah. All right. Well, that clarifies it.
So if a developer was going to build a 8-unit rental property, affordable rental, that would be 8 permits would be required for that?
You would need 8 permits, and then he'd only be able to
Seven.
apply for 7.
Sorry, the 7, he was going to, he or she was
Yeah.
building a 7-unit, then they could do it.
That's correct. Or if they want to do 8, they just have to wait till December, and hopefully
To do
there's
the
one
8.
left. Yeah.
And I-
Okay, well, that clarifies it then. I just thought I heard that differently, but thank you.
Thank you, Robin.
Yeah, bye.
Any questions out in the,
Lori,
oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lori.
can you hear me? Okay. So on the other end of this, when the units are done, how does somebody get a unit? Like, are they getting on a waiting list with the state, with HUD, with Kennebunkport? How does that happen? Or am I jumping the gun there?
So Laura, you're saying like, how would someone be eligible for an affordable unit?
Yeah.
They would
How-
need,
what-
they would need
how
to
would
work
they
with
be-
the developer. And so if that's with a private developer, they would have to go through that application process. Or if they were with a Vesta or the Housing Trust, they would need to work, so they need to work through whatever application process there is for that.
So that's something that would be managed by, not by Kennebunkport, by
Correct.
the state?
Correct. We would manage ensuring that they're complying with having affordable homes, but not the application or assignment process.
Okay, so if somebody wanted to take advantage of one of these places in Kennebunkport, then they would go to Avesta, for example, and say, and express their interest when something becomes available, like that kind of thing? That's,
Yep, that's right.
okay. Thank you.
That's what I was just asking.
Oh, I just had a quick one. Hillary, is there I'm not really familiar with the formula on affordability. Is there an asset component to it? I sell my house at Goose Rocks, which didn't flood last week, and I do something with the money, and I just have Social Security and a little, interest. So notwithstanding the fact that I sold my $2 million house, can I qualify?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Can we allow Larissa to address that?
Sure.
Yeah, that'd be great. You want to come?
You got to come up to the microphone, though.
Yes, there are ways to assess that. So, for instance, Avesta has a very nice spreadsheet that's very detailed. So what are the assets that somebody has? Because you don't want to exclude somebody who currently owns a home from being able to purchase an affordable home. We can all, I'm sure, imagine people in our lives that are maybe able to sell not a $2 million home, okay, but let's imagine that, sure, but let's imagine that you lived in a $2 million home that you happen to own in trust with 6 siblings.
Right.
Right? So now you sell that home, everyone gets their piece of the pie, and let's make it a $1.8 million home to make my math easier. And you're left with $300,000. $300,000 cannot buy you anything in Kennebunkport, or Arundel, and so you would want to be able to qualify for an affordable home. And so there are very clear mathematical calculations to figure out the asset that somebody might be selling that then still allows them, if they truly are income eligible, to access an affordable unit after they've made that sale. But there are safety nets to make sure that, for whatever reason, somebody wants to sell their $2 million beachfront home that did not flood and move into a much, we can imagine, smaller home at an affordable price, that there's protections to make sure that we are not wasting the investment that people have put into making a home affordable on someone that does, in fact, have the means to buy in a market space.
So thank you.
Yeah.
My question would be,
Oh, am I staying?
yes, stay, why not? So if a private developer came in, and I assume if he was relying on tax credits and federal financing or state, that would be true.
Correct.
And if not, would there be any limitation on that, or could it be sold to?
So I've been listening to these questions. I think people have mentioned before. I cannot imagine a reality in which a for-market developer is building affordable housing that is not subsidized through a state or federal agency. It is simply not possible. We can hypothesize that some person who has
Jeff
tons
Bezos
of money
wants
wants
to
to,
give money.
but at that point, who cares? It's their business, right? They haven't received any public funding to help make that house affordable, so what rights and regulations would the state or the federal government have to regulate it?
Well,
they've just made a nice gift to someone.
Yeah, there was a public benefit that came from the rezoning to allow the
right,
density.
right.
That's
But
just my question.
The costs simply do not work. You cannot build a home for the cost. So Maine Housing caps the sale of an affordable home at $325,000 right now. You cannot build a home for $325,000. It is simply, I'm going to just put that right out there. In Kennebunkport, you cannot build a $325,000 home. So there's no way to make money on this proposition, and so you would not do so if you did not have the subsidies that were going to be coming in.
Okay. Wait, before you leave, Larissa, is it okay if I?
Sure.
So,
Would
and
you
I,
introduce yourself just for the record?
Certainly. I'm Larissa Crockett. I'm the Executive Director of the Kennebunkport Heritage Housing Trust.
so I don't know if Tracy's still listening, so it might be, we might need her to jump in on this. So I just wanted the board and the residents and the other board to, a topic came up when we were talking about the law, about the affordability part of it. And in the Heritage Trust, it's 90 years that the house stays.
It is forever affordable. We simply have a 99-year lease with each
Okay,
homeowner.
right. And then what the Growth Committee was talking about was that portion of the LD 2003 is 30 years.
That's a state regulation.
Which is the state. So that's why we were wondering, in our community, why wouldn't we, there was actually conversation about would we want to increase that to 90? I understand from a state perspective or from the law, we probably couldn't. But that just seemed, it was a little uneasy because we had the heritage model in our mind. And then we were thinking through in 30 years, so affordability stays for 30 years. It's within this law. You guys get that?
Within the law.
Yeah. So
I think
after
that there
30
are two
years.
factors in there as well. So if you figure that most people who are going through Main State Housing will get a 30-year mortgage. So the idea is they start when they're young, they're lower income, they have the house 30 years. After that, kind of put in their time and they have the right to sell it. Another piece that we talk about the subsidy, but don't forget, they also get to build higher density than they would have if they were not building affordable housing. So I can put more on a lot now, which gives me an additional incentive.
Piece of infrastructure.
That's the point of the law.
Right. At a market base.
Tracy, go ahead.
Yeah, and that was well said, and I think I would just add to that again, these are the minimums required. They are not mandated, so if you, there was a interest in increasing that or having it be a greater number, that is, I believe, fine, and I'll defer to Hillary if she has any other feedback there. But I do think, yes, when you look at the way that the financing programs that Maine Housing manages, there is an acknowledgement that, there is a turnover at some point in time, and typically you're going to have some turnover in the mortgage as well. So if it's an ownership situation, that mortgage could, when someone moves, that's going to change. But if it is a an apartment or a rental situation, that also enables the owner to refinance and keep that affordability in there and have that period be long enough that the benefit has accrued to the community.
Okay. Thank you.
So, if you don't mind,
No, go ahead.
I want to be cognizant of Hillary's time. She's
Yeah,
been
no,
a
I
phenomenal
agree.
resource.
Thank you.
It is past 7:30.
Yeah, it's time.
Thank you so much. I just want to say before I go that Galen has my contact information, but it was also put on the slide. So please, 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 if you have any questions moving forward, I can answer them, or my colleague Ben also can answer them. So if you might hear from both of us if you email us. But
Okay.
please, please, questions, we welcome them. So thank you so much for having me, and I apologize for my time crunch, but
Oh, thanks.
thank you so much.
So would the planning board like to adjourn?
I'll take a motion.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in
And
favor?
would the growth planning committee like to adjourn?
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
I'll second. All in favor?
And the select board?
I will make a motion that we adjourn.
Okay. The LD 2003 workshop is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hillary.